Hello. For this first part of the module, we'll be going over how to use Postman to capture API requests so that we can then use the APIs and convert them into PowerShell scripts to later automate through pipelines using Azure DevOps and YAML. So to get started, you'll need Postman installed locally. Just Google it and download it and install it. Once you're in here, create an account so that you can save your API requests and reference them if you need to. The main thing that we will be using in Postman is called the interceptor, which is what is capturing those API requests as we do them in the browsers. So to do that, in the bottom right corner, you'll see Start Proxy. Click on that and you'll see some options for the extension for interceptor that you'll need. And this can be installed based on what browser you're using. So for my example, I'm using Edge. If I click on that, it's going to take me to the Postman Interceptor add-on page to be able to install that. I've already got it installed, so I don't have the option. I need to remove it. In the extension section, I can see Postman Interceptor is here for use. So once you've got that installed, come back to your local Postman and you can start the capture of the API request either by clicking Start Proxy Session here, or in your browser you can right click on the extension and click Start Capture there. But we need to identify what we're going to be capturing first before we start that capture. So for this example, I'm going to be using Power Platform and making a specific setting change and capturing what the APIs are doing in the background when I make that change. So this is a very specific example in Power Platform, but this is just to articulate the methodology used, and you can take that on and use it for any other platform that has APIs integrated with it. So for this one, I'll be going to Tables, and you can see the account table here. If we open that, we can see all of the tables, all of the columns here. And there's one here that I've created called Record ID. So if I edit that column, there's a value in here called the seed value. And this is a very specific setting that I want to use as the example for changing that seed value automatically through running a pipeline. So the current seed value is 1,500, but we want to capture what the API is doing in the background when that number is actually changed. So we want to change it to maybe 2,000. So to capture what it's doing when we make that change, we can come here to the extension, or you can go locally, whichever one you want, and we click Start Capture. It takes a second to detect your local Postman being open, but click Start Capture and then change that value. Click Save. And that's going to capture everything that's happening on the back end with the API requests when changing that number. If we open up the extension, we can see all of the requests that are being captured as part of that. Okay, now it's finished. We click Stop Capture, and it'll ask us to open Postman. And we can see all of the requests that happened during that API request, or that change to the number. And what we're really looking for is a method of post. The post is what's actually making that change. And we want to make sure that we're looking for a URL that is against the organization that we're making the change against. And if we have a look at all of these ones, the one that I can see that is probably most relevant is this post here. So it's got the organization and it's got set auto number seed. So the auto number is what we're changing. So let's have a look at that. And the body, we can see here, oh, it targeted the entity name account, the attribute name, record ID, and it changed the value to 2000. So we can see exactly what the API call is in regards to making that change of that number. So the next part of the module will be looking at how can we convert that API call into a PowerShell script automatically without us having to write it ourselves. Next part we need to go over is how do we convert that API call into PowerShell script. And there's a great functionality built into the Postman app where you can automatically convert it and copy it out. So inside the request that we captured in the last video, on the right hand side there's a small code button here. So when we click that, there's some options here where you can choose what language you want to export that out to be. For this example, I'll just be using PowerShell REST method, and you can see here it's got quite a lot, but there's some information in here that's not quite relevant to what we're going to be doing going forward. But the main part is the body and the invoke REST method sections that we're going to be using. So we can just copy all of that and open up PowerShell and paste that in. And we can see here that it's got quite a lot of headers, and the ones that are the most important that we need to keep is the content type, so that it remains to be application JSON, and the authorization bearer token. I say that, but we need to actually get rid of that and generate our own bearer token going forward. So in order to just clean this up a little bit, we'll need to just take out all of these other headers that won't be used. We keep the new object header because we need that in order to add the other headers into it. And this is the basis of the script itself. So we will be replacing this bearer token that we have here with a variable itself. So I'll just put in a code block here, and in here we need to collect a client ID, a client secret, the tenant ID, and we'll also need the name of the organization that we're targeting as well. This is my automatically granted name, but you'll have a different name, and we'll need to put that in there. So the first three are the variables. The fifth is how we create the body of the request in order to get the token. And the line 7 is the actual REST method post that we're doing in order to get a token. So I'll put this in the description so that you can use this. But we need to actually go and create a service principal that can be used as with the client ID, the secret, and the tenant ID. And then we'll insert that into the script and we'll run it to test that it works using PowerShell. In this part of the module, we'll be looking at how we can create a service principal in Azure and enter that into our PowerShell script that we've created, into the variables that we have at the top here for client ID, client secret, and tenant ID. So if you open up the Azure portal, go to Microsoft Entra ID or Azure AD, and go to App Registrations. Click on New Registration, and this can be anything that you want it to be. For this example, I'll just call it D365 SP for Service Principal. Don't need to enter anything else, just click Register. and then it will give us a client ID. That's the first one that we need. So we'll copy that and put that into the script. And we also need a secret. So for that one, we need to generate it ourselves. So click on Clients and Secrets on the left and click on New Client Secret. The name for it can be anything you want. So I'll just call it Client Secret and set the time for when it is going to expire. You can actually create them with unlimited time if you do it through PowerShell, but doing it that way is not really recommended because it's best practice to always cycle your secrets on your applications or service principals. So I'll just put 24 months and hit add. And you'll be presented here with a value, and that is our client secret. So click that to copy it and put it into the script. Go back to Azure and keep in mind that you need to make sure that you copy it out before you leave the page, because you can see if I refresh the page now, it's going to have the value not visible anymore. And there's no way to really know what that is unless you delete it and recreate it again. So now that we've got the secret and the ID, we need to also get the tenant ID. And that's back in Azure AD or Entra ID. And you can just see it on the home page here for it, tenant ID. So we can just copy that, put that into the script. So now we have a full script to be able to run this to get the token and execute the changes under the authentication of this application. But the service principal that we created in Azure, it doesn't have any permissions on the table that we're trying to change under here. So in order to grant the permission for it to be able to make those changes, we need to go to the Power Platform Admin Center. So we need to go to the environment where that resource is hosted. For me, I've only got the one environment, so just my default one that I'll go to. And then we need to go into the environment settings. And under users, there's a section here called application users. So in here, we need to grant the permissions for it to be able to execute the changes. So click new app user, add an app, and we can see the one that we need is right there. D365SP is the one that we created. We'll add that. Business unit can just be the default one for your organization, and add the security roles that you need in order to execute that change. It is a good idea to go through least privilege in order to just give it the rights that it needs in order to make the change to the resource that you want. But for this one, I'll just put system administrator, and click save and click create. And that will assign that application with access to be able to make those changes that the API call previously did under our own account. You can see that that is added there now. So now that we have the permissions added for the service principal, it's created, we have its ID, we have its secret, and we have the tenant that we're targeting, we can run this and make the changes that we need to. Just keep in mind that you need to make sure the scope of the URL here is your own organization. Make sure it's the same as the one that was captured when we did the API request. You can see down here, it has the organization name that was captured in the API request. So you can just copy that and put it up here so that it's the same. We also need to change the bearer token that's used so that we're referencing the one that we're getting via the auth request. So in order to do that, we just take this entire token and remove it. And we need to reference line 7's variable in order to get the result of the REST method post that's going and grabbing that token. So in order to do that, we need to add plus and the variable, which is auth request. And then we need to bring that down to the access token, which is that string there. So now it will grab this value of the header will be the bearer token plus the auth request access token from line 7 here. Now that we have that in there, in the next video we'll go over a test run of the script to make sure it's working, and then how can we take that into Azure DevOps to make it a pipeline to run it automatically. Now that we have the script completed with the service principal ID, secret, tenant ID, and the API call to grab the token, as well as referencing that bearer token in the headers to be used, we can now do a test to change that value of the auto seed number. So in the script here, we have it as 2000, but it was already set to 2000 previously. So we want to change that to something else. Let's put it down to 1000. So if we run that script now, we can see it finished in a couple seconds. And then we come back here and we can still see it's 2000. So we exit out and edit again to come back in, and it's been updated to 1000. So we can see that that has taken effect and the script is working successfully. Now, what we want to do next is take the script and bring it into Azure DevOps into a pipeline so that it can run automatically just by running a pipeline. But there is a few things that we need to do in order to not only make it work, but make it secure as well. And one of the first things that we need to tackle is getting rid of any sensitive information like these IDs and secrets, especially the secret, so that it's not shown in plain text when we run it. The one thing we can do is create a library in Azure DevOps to bring those secrets in so they're not shown in plain text. In the next video, I'll go over how we create that library so that the variables can be used in the pipeline. In this video, I'll be going over how we can create a library in Azure DevOps to remove any plain text secrets or IDs that we have in our script, and so that the pipeline can use them. So go to Azure DevOps. If you don't already have a project, then click on New Project and give it a name. It should be a private visibility. There are some options down here for Git version and the work items, but can ignore those and just click Create. I've already created my one, so I'll just go into my project. And on the left-hand side, you'll see Pipelines, and under the drop-down, you'll see Library. So this is where we can put groups of variables that can be used by the pipelines so that we don't have to have plain text secrets inside of our pipeline code. So click on New Variable Group, and I'll just call this one D365SP, just like the name of the service principal, because that's fundamentally the details that we're putting in here. There is a section here that you can use for using a key vault, and that is highly recommended to do because it allows it a lot easier to manage the secrets from a key vault in Azure. It makes it more secure, easier to rotate passwords, things like that. And if you do click on it, you'll have to put in which subscription has the key vault and what the name of the key vault is. For this particular example, I won't be linking an Azure Key Vault, I'll just be creating them manually. But even if you do create them manually, make sure that those secrets that you're putting in there are kept in a safe place, whether that's Azure Key Vault or another password management system. So to add them, just click add and give it a name. So our first one is client ID, and the value of that is in our script. So we'll copy that, put that in. Next one is client secret. Copy that, put that in. And last one is tenant ID. Now we have all of the variables set there, but they're still in plain text. So the most important one in this scenario that you need to make sure that you hide is the client secret, because that is essentially the password for the service principal. So we click on this button here and it hides it, and that way no one can actually get it. They can only find out what the value of that is by going to the secure resource where you're saving your passwords in Key Vault or any other password management system. The client ID and the tenant ID are not necessarily as sensitive, so they can be left as plain text values, but if you want that extra layer of security, you can just hide those ones as well, and make them all sensitive. And then once they're in there, click save. And we also want to make sure that we enable our pipelines to be able to use this variable group when it runs. So under pipeline permissions, by default, there's no permissions to allow any pipeline to be able to use this variable group. So if you have pipelines that you've already created, you can click a plus sign and then select that pipeline and it'll give it permissions. If you want to make sure that all your pipelines are able to use this variable group, there is an option here to just say open access. And then any pipeline in Azure DevOps can use this variable group. So for this example, I'll just be using the no restrictions to make it a little bit easier when we create the pipeline later on. But it is a good idea to restrict which pipelines can use which variable groups. So I'll close that. And then that's the creation of the library. And we can now use that in the pipelines that we're going to be creating. So I'll take you through what creating that pipeline looks like in the next video. Now that we have the variable group in place, the first thing that we need to do before creating that pipeline is create a code repository that we can store all of our scripts and pipeline code in. So go to repos on the left, and you can create a new repo by coming up here and clicking new repo, and then just give it a name and click create. I've already done that. I've created one called autoseed, but just give it a name, leave it as add readme, and then create. Before we actually add or commit any code to the repository, we need to make sure that we have the right branching structure in place, following a Git flow process. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you have branches, and we want to make a development branch because we don't want to always be committing to main all the time. We want to be able to test our code in a development branch and then commit successful runs of the pipeline to the main branch. So just click new branch and just call it develop based off main and create. And that way, once we actually go live with a pipeline and we want to make changes to it, we can test those changes in the develop branch and then commit the code up to the main branch. So click on the develop branch and we can work within the space. So in here, we want to create a folder for our scripts that we previously created. So in here, click New, Folder, and just call it Scripts. You need to have a dummy file in there in order to create it. So I'll just call it test.ps1 because ps1 is the extension used for PowerShell. And you can see that we've got the file there now, and we just need to fill it with some dummy data and commit that. Just keep in mind that I'm doing all of the file creation and the commits in the web browser, but it is good practice to use something like Visual Studio Code, sync that locally and do your code changes in there, and then push your changes up to these repos. But for this example, I'll just be using the UI in the web browser. So the next step is we need to create a pipeline file. So we can click New File, and we'll call it AutoSeed pipeline.yml, because that's the extension for YAML. And then we can see that in there. Put in some dummy data, click Commit. Okay, now we need to go through and write up the YAML code. Some of it we'll write manually, some of it we'll generate ourselves. So I'll go through what that looks like in the next video. So to create the pipeline that we need to use in order to run the script, we need to structure it in a certain way. So there's a few things that YAML requires you to put in, mainly just a task that you're going to be running, but there's some things that I like to add. First one is trigger. Trigger is basically, you can use it to make it so that the pipeline runs whenever there's a new commit to the branch. I put it in here at the start at least as none, just so that any pipeline runs are done manually. Secondly is the pool. So pool is used to define a particular hardware that you want to use. So whether that's Windows or Ubuntu or something like that. So that just looks like VM image, and for this one I'll use Windows latest. The next part that we absolutely need is the variables. And this is the variable group that we created previously. That's the library. So for that, we want to use a group. And that group name was D365 SP. And that has the things like the client ID, the client secret, and the tenant ID in it that we want to import into this pipeline to be usable. So in YAML, the basic structure is you have stages, and under stages you have jobs, and under jobs you have tasks. They have different functions that you can use in order to break up different sections of your pipelines. It allows you to maybe run some part of your pipeline and not other parts if you want to test something. Jobs are also used if you want to have different parts of the pipeline to run on different hardware. Maybe you want a different VM image on one part of the pipeline and another VM image on another part. So that allows you to really break up how you want your pipeline to run. For this example, we're pretty much just running one script, so we don't really need to go into that much detail, but just to show it how the structure looks, you would want to start off with stages, and then you would have a stage and just give that a name. So I'll just call it auto seed update. You can also set a display name.
You want that name to be a bit more custom. Let's just say auto seed update, but with spaces, just so it's like maybe more legible to read. And then under the stage, we'll have a job or jobs. And then we'll have a job under there. And we'll just call that the same thing. Auto seed update. Jobs can also have a display name. We'll just keep that the same as auto seed update. And then under the job, that's where we have steps. And steps is just the list of tasks that are being run for that job. So we'll put task. But the tasks we don't necessarily need to write ourselves. We can have it generated for us based on what we want. So this is the basic structure that we're going to be having for the pipeline. But I want to create the pipeline next so that we can use additional resources in order to create the task that we want to run. So for now, I'll just commit that. And then we want to use this file to create the pipeline that we want. So if I go to pipelines and I create a new pipeline, and we want to use the Git repo that we set up before under autoseed, we have an existing file that we want to use for this pipeline. So select that and make sure you change the branch to develop because that's where we've been looking under, and you'll see the file path there. And then click continue, and then we'll import that code for the creation of the pipeline. We don't want to run it yet, we just want to save it. And then we also want to rename it to something that is a bit more accurate, maybe autoseed pipeline. The default name it gives is just the name of the repo. So change it and update it to whatever you want it to be. And click save. And then we want to go back to editing it again. And then you can see on the right hand side here, there's the tasks pane. So we can use this section to automatically generate task code for us. So if we were to, let's remove this task here, and we want to do a PowerShell task. So we select the PowerShell one. We want the file path. So we need to target a particular script that we've written to be run via the pipeline. You can click on this little information here and it'll give you the default working directory. So we can just copy that in. And then we want to have a slash. And we created a folder before to put our scripts in. So it'll be /scripts. And the file that we created before, which is called test.ps1, we'll update that later and then adjust this, but just for now, we'll use that. There are some arguments as well that we want to use in order to pass in particular variables, but just for now, I'll leave that blank and I'll just add that. And you can see that it's automatically put in the YAML code there for us to execute that task. So before we save that, I'll just put in the arguments that I was going to be using before. And what that looks like is what variables do you want to inject into the PowerShell that you're going to be running into the script. So we know what ones those are. That's client ID. And then we need to put in quotation, dollar, bracket, client ID, close. And that will bring in the client ID into the script if we format it that way. The next one that we want is the client secret. Secret. Last one was the tenant ID. Tenant ID. And now it's going to look at the variable group here at the top that we're using and try to find arguments that match client ID, client secret, and tenant ID as these variables. So because it's $sign and brackets, it's going to look in that variable group to find those variables. And now we can just save that. No need to validate just yet. And now we have the pipeline set up and targeting that PS1 test file in that location. We now need to rename and update that script so that it's correct and usable. So we'll head back into the repo and we'll find that script. And we essentially just need to copy and paste in the PowerShell script that we made previously. But very important, do not copy in the client ID, secret, and tenant ID because we don't want them to be in plain text. We just want the actual script and not the variables because we now have them in that group. So if we edit and then just paste that in, even though we don't have the variables there anymore, we still need to define them as parameters that are going to be used within the script itself. So that's the client ID, the secret, and the tenant ID that need to be defined. And I'll just paste it in, but because it's a little bit to type out. But pretty much you just have a block here that defines that this parameter is mandatory and it's a string and it's defined as this parameter. And it's going to take those variables that we defined in YAML and put them into here. And because we've referenced them as parameters, the script can use that passed in value into the script. So now that's all correct. We can commit that. And then we need to just rename this file so that it's a little bit more accurate. Just call it autoseed, like we've been doing. And then we can come back to the pipeline code, edit that, and replace this with autoseed. So now we can run this pipeline and get it to update the autoseed based on the number that we've defined here. So just so that we have a different number, we can actually edit that again. Let's make it 3000 now. So that when we run the pipeline, it's going to come to the Power Apps table and update that seed value to 3000. So we can, I'll go over that, what that process looks like in the next video. Now in this video, we'll run the pipeline that we've created that's targeting this script, which is updating the autoseed number to the value of 3000. So we can see in here that it's currently set to 1000. So let's go to pipelines. Under all, you can see the pipeline that we created before. It hasn't been run before. And we can just hit run pipeline. Make sure that you set the branch to develop because that's where we've been doing our code, and click run. And that will run the initial run of the pipeline. You can see that it's queued now, but we can actually drill in and see what that pipeline is doing by clicking on here. So we're just waiting for a Azure pipeline to become available, an agent to become available to run this pipeline. We can see that it's grabbed one now. It's checking out the repo with the code that we're using, running the PowerShell, and we can see that that is successful now. So if we come over to that table, we can see it's 1000. So we'll refresh it by going out and back in. We can see the seed value is now 3000. So we know that that pipeline is now successful. Now that we know that that is successful, it's a good idea to merge your code that you know is good from the develop branch into the main branch. So to do that, we can go to the repo and look for pull requests. And through here, we can create a new pull request to merge the code in. So our source branch is develop and our target branch is main. And we can see that this is all the code that we've created. There's nothing in the main branch, so everything is new. We can see all of the commits that we've done along the way. And we can just call this update to main. Don't really need anything else. Click create. No merge conflicts because there's nothing in main yet. And then click complete. Do not delete the branch after merging though, because we want to keep using that. And complete. And we've completed the pull request. So now if we go back to branches and we go to main, we can see that all of our code is now in there from the develop branch. So what we've done is essentially taken an action that we've done manually in the browser ourselves and identified which API call is actually being run in the background to execute that change. We've taken that and copied it over into PowerShell, and we've created a service principal that allows us to authenticate each time we're executing that command. We've taken that PowerShell script and run it and tested it successfully, and then taken that code and created our own pipeline, also using variable groups to make sure that any sensitive passwords are not displayed in plain text. And then we've run that pipeline and it is successful. So this is a very specific situation, but if you can keep in mind that this whole process is really good for adding in targeted automations for your pipelines. As your pipelines get bigger and bigger and have more things that they're trying to execute, this process is really good for adding in a particular part of your pipeline, whether it's a stage or a job or a task or a step. It allows you to get really granular with what you want your pipeline to do, to which platform, to which resource, and it allows for a lot of automation, and this process can be used quite broadly. So thank you for watching through this process, and I hope you learned something.